Cool, cool. We already have people pouring in. That's great. All right, just FYI, everybody, for those of you who are just now joining us, this is Central Valley Scholars' medical school webinar. And just to let you all know, we're going to start officially at 1:05 just to give participants some time to log in and get situated. All right, for those of you who are still logging in, this is just a reminder, we're going to start the webinar officially at 1:05 just to give everyone a chance to sign in. So for those of y'all who just logged in, just a reminder, we're starting at 1:05, so just a couple minutes away. We just want to make sure everyone is comfortable and situated and is able to log in and to really be able to experience the whole webinar. All right, cool. So it's 1:05, so I think we're going to go ahead and start. Thank you, everyone, for joining. hopefully more people trickle in as we go on. My name is Katya. I'm the events coordinator for Central Valley Scholars. It's such a pleasure to see you all here. My pronouns are she, her, and this is, of course, the Central Valley Scholars Medical School webinar being hosted by Jose Acosta, Dr. Jose Acosta, pronouns he, him, his. And we're going to talk a little bit about navigating med school as a Central Valley resident and just about medical school in general. So Jose, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide really quickly. Jose, can we go to the slide about Central Valley Scholars really quickly?
Yeah.
And
yeah,
then I'll just talk a little bit about our services. Awesome, thank you. I was waiting for it to load on my screen. But
no
yeah,
worries.
So just a little background. Yeah, just a little bit about us. Central Valley Scholars is a nonprofit based in the Central Valley and composed of students from the Central Valley and just various counties in the Valley. And yeah, so some of the services that we offer aside from our webinars, our workshops, mentorships, internships, job opportunities like this one, and many other things. So you can learn more about us at centralvalleyscholars.org, which is at the bottom of this slide. If you're not already familiar with it, you should definitely check it out. Sign up for our newsletter to get all the most recent updates and any information on what we're doing. And of course, this webinar will also be published, along with all of our other webinars, will be published on our website under our resources tab in the near future. So keep an eye out for that. If you ever want to revisit this resource, it'll be there for you to look at. And with all that being said, I am going to turn off my camera and my audio and hand it over to Jose. I will be back at the end of the webinar to read off the questions that can be left in the Q&A box that is at the bottom of your screens. So without further ado, I'll hand it off to Jose.
Thank you, Katya, and thank you everyone for tuning in. This is a big honor and a big privilege for me. Really impressed with Central Valley Scholars and all that they've done and continue to do. So it's an awesome organization and a big privilege for me to be here today. So a little bit about myself. So my name is Jose Acosta, originally from Carmen, California. I've been Dr. Acosta now for the past month or so since I finished medical school and started residency. I did my undergraduate studies at Fresno State University, go Dogs. Medical school, I did my medical school at UC Davis School of Medicine, specifically in the San Joaquin Valley Prime Track, which I would talk a little bit about in my presentation, which is basically a specific track within the school that serves to serve the Central Valley. And then the last month, I started my residency in emergency medicine at Alameda Health System Highland Hospital, which is in Oakland. Some things about my upbringing. So I was raised in the San Joaquin Valley, where many of us know is a big agricultural hub and is the largest agriculture region in the world. Growing up here, I saw how much my community provided for the world, and that was in the sense of the food that's seen not only in the Central Valley, not even in the state of California, not even in the United States, but the world. And seeing how hard my family, community, and myself were to provide this to the world, and then growing up, some of the healthcare disparities I witnessed really inspired me to pursue medicine or pursue something that I felt was missing in my community. And I will touch a little bit further about that journey throughout the presentation. And I think in this journey, as a first generation Latinx student from the Valley, there's been a lot of ups and downs, a lot of lessons, a lot of triumphs, but most importantly, full support from my family and community. So here's the goals of the presentation. So within this hour, I hope to cover the AMCAS application, which is the American Medical College application system for medical school. We're going to touch upon the different sections of the application, where then we're going to talk a little bit about the secondary application and interviews, which many may or may not be familiar with. And then I think the big highlight that I want to highlight is my approach and takeaways, because I feel a lot of this information you might be able to figure out the logistical stuff by Googling it, but really trying to give you an inside look and an inside, I guess, picture of how I approached the application and what I've learned along the way. And also, I hope to be a resource outside from this application. Hopefully, a lot of us can connect through Central Valley Scholars for, like Katya mentioned, mentorship, as well as any questions that may come up later. So I think the first thing, the big question to tackle is why medicine, right? It's it's a long journey. It's a lot of years. It's a lot of studying. But for me, and I'll share a little bit more later, but basically the fundamental things that kind of motivated me to do medicine was I saw that I saw a lot of healthcare disparities in my community, whether that was because of language barriers, because of socioeconomic status, because of just geographic distance from rural areas to a more urban city. What medicine could provide for you? And this is another question that, maybe that comes across many people's minds, and I think for me, with medicine, it's something that's rewarding. It's something that I always knew, hopefully, that I could, in one way or another, that I could kind of leave an imprint and hopefully make my community and this world a better place. And I feel that I could accomplish that through medicine. It's very rewarding. Also, you have a voice. It really gives you to be an advocate, not only inside the clinical setting, but even more importantly, at times outside the clinical settings, and try to tackle system barriers. And then the Central Valley track. So for those who may be in the application cycle or thinking about it, this is something that I really encourage students to look a little bit more into. And so previously, the official name for the program is the San Joaquin Valley Prime Program, and it was part of the UC Davis School of Medicine. Within the past year, it's transitioned over to UCSF School of Medicine, and just the big picture takeaways from this program. Your first 2 years, which is their preclinical years, where you're really kind of sitting down, going to lecture, learning from the slides, learning from the textbook, kind of the basis for medicine. And then your third and fourth year, which is traditionally the clinical years, where you're actually in the hospital, when you're actually seeing patients, when you're putting in orders, that's your third and fourth years. And those, you get the opportunity to do them at UCSF Fresno and other sites in the Central Valley. So for those Central Valley students or anyone else who may be interested in improving the healthcare of the San Joaquin Valley, that's a program that I, in retrospect, would do over 110%. And then a little bit about the mentors, which Katya talked about briefly. That's something that Central Valley Scholars offers, and I would totally take advantage of that opportunity to really have someone there that's where you want to be and guide you through the process, the ups and downs, and what they learned along the way. So challenges in medicine, like anything, I think many of us have heard, if it was easy, anyone would do it. And like anything else, there are a couple of challenges in medicine, and specifically, I feel it's a little bit more challenging for underrepresented students. Some of those are systemic barriers. So kind of reflecting on my journey, I feel that one of those that was really difficult for me was a lot of in the section of the standardized testing, specifically in the MCAT. The way the test is structured, it's a lot of verbal, a lot of, advanced like English terminology. And for me, I remember when I was, especially the CAR section or the English portion of the exam, a lot of the words, like growing up, I grew up in a Spanish-speaking household. A lot of the words were pretty foreign to me, to be honest. And, with that little challenge, I kind of knew that I needed to, dedicate and focus myself more on advancing my English vocabulary. So I did things like read the New Yorker. They have specific certain test prep companies have specific verbal passages that help you improve with that. But there are definitely barriers along the way that make it a little bit more difficult, or definitely more difficult for an underrepresented student in medicine. The next one, imposter syndrome. This is also something that's very real, especially, you know, the further you go in the educational ladder, the less and less diversity you see. And that was something that sometimes when I would go in the clinical settings that my third and fourth year now in residency, it's like, wow, like there's not that many people that look like me, that share some of the same beliefs as me, that have the same upbringing as me. And it sometimes gets you to think like, oh, do I really belong here? But I think some of the things that are more refreshing and more, I guess, motivating to me, when you come across and connect with that specific patient that reminds you of where you're from, and just their gratitude and their overwhelming just shine in their eyes when they see you, it's like, okay, I belong here. And not only because I worked my tail off to be here, but because of this population and I'm good at that I'm doing. And diversity, like I mentioned, the higher up you go, the less diverse it seems to get. And then I'd like to share, I guess, a quote or a conversation I had with one of the physicians at UC Davis, and he told me, he pretty much broke it down saying, this is the amount of Latinx population in California, like 40 or 50%. The amount in medicine is about 4 to 5%. And then the amount that is in academic medicine, I think at the time was like 2 or 3%. And he told me, you know, one of my goals is by the time I'm done, hopefully I could increase that number or double that number. So I think that's something that we should all work towards, and just goes to show that we are very much needed in the medical field. So quickly, and starting, I think, what is your motivation? You know, because it's a long journey. There's ups, there's downs. Sometimes you're just really tired and you've been studying a lot, and you're like, dang, is this worth it? Or you miss out on the birthday party, or you miss out on, you know, X, Y, and Z, family event or personal event. And I think it's important to sit down and kind of always remember these things. And for me, like I mentioned, some of the key things that motivate me is the farm working community. Growing up, working in the fields and seeing how hard my family worked, and seeing a lot of barriers to healthcare was my initial spark in medicine. This picture here represents, you know, serving others. It's one of the most, I feel personally for me, it's one of the most rewarding things you can do, where you see someone and experiencing all these emotions, pain, fear, uncertainty, and through, you know, your knowledge and your empathy and your ability to connect with the patient, you could really make a big difference. Family, this is another big motivation for me. Traditionally or historically in my family, I would say about 95% is in the realm of agriculture, whether that be, you know, originally from picking tomatoes in the fields, or now, you know, fortunately, you know, being managers at some of these ranches. I think, you know, advancing up the educational ladder, having these opportunities that for most of us, our parents didn't have, really opens more doors and allows others to see like, wow, like, you know, it's possible. And then the last thing here, I think, represents for me equality. And regardless of, you know, your ability to pay, your gender, your race, your beliefs, I think everyone should have access to something as fundamental as healthcare. So this is the general timeline in becoming a physician. So our focus here today is going to be on this side, which is before medical school and the undergraduate, during undergrad, and in the transition to apply to medical school. And then after that, there's medical school. There's this crazy process called the match, which decides where you're going to go for your residency. There's residency, and then once you're done with residency, as a attending or independent physician, there's always you always have to stay up to date, and you have to recertify for your board exam like every 10 years or so. But our focus will be here, and if there's time or if there's questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box, and then I'll hopefully answer those at the end of the presentation. So here's a look of my timeline specifically. And so for me, this is how long it's taken me up to this point. And the big takeaway here is that every timeline is different. Everyone has a different story, and yours may or may not look like this. And that's okay. Some of my classmates who in medical school, someone did a PhD and came back to do medical school. Some people go out in the workforce and realize like, wow, I think, I want to do medicine, and I'm going to go back to school to do that. So for me, I finished undergrad in 4.5 years. I took about 6 months off before starting medical school. Medical school for me was 4 years. My residency specifically in emergency medicine is 4 years, but these could vary depending on the specialty, from 3 to like 7 years. And then total years after you finish a high school, at least for me, it's going to be 13 years where I could practice independently. And I know it seems like that's a long time, but one, it goes by super fast, especially if you enjoy what you're doing. And then two, if you have, the motivation or kind of those fundamental things as your basis to always turn back on, I think that definitely helps with the journey and the time. So here is basically an overview of a timeline regarding the med school application. So this year, it opened May 4th, 2020. So at that time when it opens, it means you can have access and start inputting your information, start inputting your activities, start inputting your personal statement and different parts of the application, which I'll go and show you. And then the day this year to submit it, to send it to medical school, was May 28th. And then once it usually takes some time for all the information that you inputted to get verified. And that's when it's released to the medical schools, and then they start looking at your application and sending either secondary applications, which are just a couple more questions that they want to ask specifically about their school, and interviews. And the big takeaway here is I highly, highly, highly recommend to get your application in on this date. And the reason being is that there is rolling admission for medical schools and for interviews. So let's say a certain program, a certain school gives 500 interviews a year. And if you submit on this day, you're eligible for those 500 interviews. But if, let's say you submit later in July or August, by that time, let's say they've given away 150 or 200 interviews. So then now you're competing for less interview spots. So that's a big recommendation that I have. Really try to get it as early as possible. And this is how this is how the application website looks like. So the website is AMCAS. You could just Google that and go to AMCAS. And then once you click on that, it should look like this. And it's AMCAS sign in. You click on that, and then you could start application and have an account. And then this is kind of just this year how it looked like if you wanted to start it in 2021 or 2020. And then this is just a general layout of, again, of all the things that we're going to cover today. And one thing is that I feel is helpful. I think even if you're not ready to apply, I think it's important for you just to have an account. And because once you have an account, I think that kind of sets the tone and saying like, wow, I started something, now I have to finish it. So one of the barriers as well is in this journey is the financial barrier. And luckily there is financial assistance for students who do qualify. And this is kind of the assistance program that they had for this previous year. So they have a MCAT kind of preparation bundle. Your MCAT, instead of being $320, it's reduced to $130. There's this really helpful book that I will talk about later on. They also include that, and your fees are waived for 20 medical schools, as well as any secondary supplemental applications that you get. And this is, you can see that this is it could be pretty expensive, especially if, if you don't apply for this program. So that's something else I highly recommend. And if you just you could just Google fee assistance AMCAS program, and it'll lead you to the correct site. Here, this is actually my AMCAS application back in 2016. And this is just general information, just to input things, your name, your address, things like that. So not really going to spend too much on this slide, but just wanted to be thorough and complete to show you all portions of the application. Here's one thing that I do really want to highlight, and that's the disadvantage statement. And so the AAMC kind of describes this or qualifies someone for being disadvantaged if, for social reasons, whether it's if they're treated differently due to ethnicity, language, religion, or sexual orientation. Economically, if they received any form of government aid, or growing up in a single parent household that is one income below the poverty level. And educational, if one has a learning disability or attending a low performing public schools. So this was kind of my take on how I tackle the disadvantage statement. So the important thing is to kind of create a timeline and really reflect on your upbringing, and really thinking back, like, did I encounter any of these things, and just kind of jotting those things down. And the thing to emphasize is to state the facts. Really try not to express too much emotions or all the, I guess, the downfalls or how terrible it was, but really just be really objective and be like, okay, this is how I grew up, and this is kind of what I went through. And most importantly is to really highlight what you learned from it, or how you became a stronger person, or how you're better suited in medicine because of these experiences, and how these experiences make you unique and really make you stand out from all the other thousands of applicants that apply every year. So this is actually my disadvantage statement that I wanted to share. And the big reason is so everyone could kind of get an idea of what one should look like or one should sound like. So kind of taking these kind of key core ideas, this is what I came up with for me. So for me, my disadvantage, I grew up in the rural outskirts of San Joaquin, California, where my parents work as farm workers. There was no public library, high school, or access to healthcare, as the nearest hospital was 2 hours away. Our lack of access to higher education led us to move to Carmen, California, where I attended middle school as an English learner. The transition was difficult because my parents were Spanish speakers. They only have a 6th grade education from Mexico, and those were not able to help me academically. I attended Carmen High School, an underperforming school where, like most students, I qualified for free lunch. Financial circumstances led us to use government assistance programs to supplement our salary and provide for the 7 members of my family. In high school, I worked in the tomato fields on weekends and summers to help with finances. And then I kind of touched a little bit more some of the other kind of educational hardships early on, and I finished with, despite these hardships, I will graduate with honors from colleges and will be the first in my family to pursue a medical degree. So this is kind of mentioned some of these from the aspects of social, economically or educationally, some of these barriers that you face, really state what they were, but most importantly, reflect on how that made you who you are today, and how that made you a stronger, better person. This is another slide just for completeness, to be completely thorough. There's a section where you write the undergraduate institutions or community colleges that you attended. And this is just kind of logistical data that you input on the AMCAS application. Schools takeaway. So when applying to these schools, because sometimes it's pretty difficult to figure out where, where am I going to go for undergrad? Where am I going to go to medical school? Where am I going to go to residency? And these are kind of some of the core ideas that I always taken along the way. The first one, where will you be happy? I think it's very clear, and studies have shown that if you're in a positive environment, you're more often to do well than you're not. Where will you be supported? A question that I always like to ask is, or one question that I asked when applying to residency was, I actually tore my Achilles tendon in medical school, in the third year of medical school, when I was clinical rotations, and every interview I had, I would say, oh, well, I had this happen, in medical school. If something like that would happen in residency, how would the program respond? Or can you tell me about a situation where one of the residents, life happens and something unexpectedly happened, and how did the program respond? And I think that really gives you a big takeaway of, when life happens, if a program or a school really has your back or not. Placed with the right environment for you, kind of touches overlap with the previous points. Look and speak at the current students and upperclassmen. This is something that I also always took to heart. When I was interviewing for medical school, I would always go either the day before, just to kind of get a gist of where everything was at, and really when no one really expected me to be there, and really just like looked around and saw if the students looked happy, if the students had kind of the family feel, if they were together, or did they just go like their separate ways, or was it cutthroat or not? And I think that's something very, very important to look at when deciding which school to attend. And then also, does the school have the same values, or put an emphasis on what is important to you? So for me, one of the big things in undergrad, in medical school, and in residency was diversity. And I really wanted to see schools really reinforce and support that, and really show action in that. A lot of times, it's not as transparent as you would like, but I think that's one thing to really think about what's important to you, and really ask about that or explore that in an institution. Coursework. So there's another section of coursework, and these are kind of just a list of classes that I took. And the takeaway here is to apply to medical school, you could be any major that you like. I was a biology major just because I thought that was interesting to me. But some people do anthropology, some people do English, some people do kinesiology. You just have to take a lot of the core classes that you need to take the MCAT, which I'll talk a little bit about more later. Coursework takeaway, and this is pretty much how I approach studying. A big thing is just repetition, repetition, repetition. Don't think I'm like the brightest person all the time, but I know that I will work hard, and won't stop really studying or until no matter how long it takes, until I really feel comfortable with the information. Something that they taught in medical school at one of like the educational learning directors was to get as much repetition as possible. They recommended to pre-read. So let's say you're doing a chapter on or in physiology about heart physiology or pulmonary physiology. Before lecture, try to skim the chapter or kind of skim the sections to kind of get an idea. Okay, we're going to be talking about certain lung diseases today. Then in lecture, you really try to, I always try to sit in the front. I know sometimes that's not the cool thing to do, but I wasn't there to be cool. I was there to learn. So I always sat in the front because I know it kept me focused. If I sat in the back, I would probably, be on my phone or maybe talk too much or anything like that. And then shortly after, I would sit down and review what we learned in class. So by doing that in a day, you see the same material about 3 times. Connect with people who took the course. This is something else that I recommend in undergrad. Let's say if I was going to take physiology and I knew someone who took physiology who did well in the course, I would reach out to them and kind of just really try to pick their brain on what they did, what they would do differently, if they had any, previous tests, to give me an idea how the professor asked questions, things like that. Understand how to study for this course, and I think that kind of goes along the same lines. Really connecting with students who did well in the class, or just going to your professor's office hours and sitting down and saying, hey, I know the midterm's coming up. Traditionally, is it more based on the lecture slide or off the textbooks or a combination of both? So you really know how to focus your time and advocating for yourself. Sometimes I was in a situation where I was like in a B+ or A- range, and really just talking to the professor in those times and be like, I really put a lot of effort. I really work hard. Is there anything else that I can do to, to boost my grade, or, and I think if you show effort throughout the school year and really stay connected and get yourself to be known, a lot of the times it would be in your favor. And something that can be replaced, of course, is just studying and putting the number of hours in. There's a section on the GPA and the MCAT that's also part of the application. And then the MCAT, to how I approach the MCAT and kind of board exams along the way, it was first you got to make a schedule. You have to figure out how many days do I have to study, and then how much material do I need to cover. So usually I would look like, how many chapters do I need to cover? And I have whatever, 30, 60 days for the MCAT. I think I studied for 2 months during the summer break. So I kind of just blocked off those 2 months, looked at how many chapters I needed to cover and made an outline. Today I'm going to cover, this chapter in biology. By 4 days, I want to cover all of biology, et cetera, et cetera. There's this resource I learned later in medical schools, which is also now for the MCAT. It's called UWorld, and I think their explanations and the way they write questions is phenomenal. So I would highly recommend that. Of course, the double AMC practice test that you could access on their website, which are also a great resource. Anki, which is kind of like this flashcard study tool. I'm not sure how many are familiar with this, but I think it really, really works wonders and really helps you just memorize a lot of information. And there's specific decks specifically for the MCAT that you can Google or look on Reddit, and it kind of breaks them down into specific subjects, and you just really just review. Also, a big part of the test is just confidence and just mental, physical, emotional well-being. I think it's just really believing in yourself that, okay, I can do this. I could put the time in and not really doubt yourself, and really kind of go into the test optimistically. And throughout the time, whether it's 1 month, 2 months, or more that you study for, you really have to remember, yes, this test is important, but it's not as important as you. Meaning, if you need to take a little bit of time, an hour or two or a day, to really focus and dial in to make sure you're okay, or to do things that you missed if you really haven't been able to do so. In the long run, I think it really is in your benefit. Work and activities. This is another section. It's pretty much just highlighting things that you did during undergrad. And this was my approach. First and foremost, make sure you do something that you're really passionate about, and not just a check off a box. And the general structure, first you want to describe what the organization was, then you want to describe what you did, and most importantly, again, what you learned from it. So I'm just gonna, these are kind of two of my experiences. I'll just do one. So first part, describe the organization. So the Health Careers Opportunity Program offers tutoring services to prepare and support students from disadvantaged backgrounds seeking to enter the health professions. Due to my successful performance in organic chemistry, I was selected to tutor my peers. What did you do? I reviewed content with students, identified knowledge gaps, and developed individualized study strategies. And then kind of what you learned from it. Or I attended multiple tutoring presentations and applied my students' feedback to improve my communication and teaching skills. So this was a tutoring service. This is how I tutored, and through this, I learned that I could be a better teacher for my patients and communicate better with my patients. And these are another list of kind of work and activities that I did. And this is really just to show you that anything really that you do that you're passionate about, it applies to medicine. So for me, I grew up playing basketball, and basketball was something that I really enjoyed. So during undergrad, I was an assistant basketball coach back in my hometown. And so some of the things, if I were to do this kind of with the same structure that we talked about here, so describe what the organization was, I was a basketball coach for the middle school team. This is what we did. I helped with, drills or kind of the coaching aspect. And what did you learn from it? Well, I learned how to be a better communicator. Because I interacted with, kids and teenagers from different ages. I learned how to be more patient because sometimes, if you want things to be done a certain way or in a certain time, and that's always not the case. I learned more about teamwork, and that applies directly because in healthcare, you're working in a big team with nurses and other physicians and other ancillary staff. So anything you do, if you're really passionate about this, played a big part. Like, please make sure you include that. Personal comments is kind of the personal statement of that application. And big thing is here, this is kind of my approach, start early. So I think I started about like 6 months before the application was due. And my approach, the first draft, just write. Whatever comes to mind, whatever you feel is important, a reason why you're doing medicine, just write. It doesn't even have to flow chronologically at first. Just write all the things that you think is important. The reason for that is, you write all these things that happened, and then you can show it to people that you trust or people that you want their input on it. And if you were to kind of not write as much, they might not see something that you've written that could be very important in the overall personal statement. And my approach to reviewing, so I had one of my English professors review it for grammar, someone review it for content, and that was one of my good friends who was accepted like 2 years prior. And is it you? At the end of the day, like, this is your personal statement. This is your story. No one could tell it better than you can. So if you appreciate everyone's input, but at the end of the day, you have to really be honest and be like, is this person on this paper really me? Be vulnerable and share life experiences. I think at first I didn't know how much to write or how vulnerable to be. And this is really an opportunity to give the reader an insight on, what was your background? What was a day in the life for you? And of course, be descriptive, really bring them in as if they were in your shoes, and share a patient story. I feel patient stories really go a long way. And like I mentioned, only you can tell your story as it should be told. So, sometimes you get a lot of advice and you're like, well, should I listen to person A or should I listen to person B? Because, I don't want to hurt their feelings, or I don't want to, at the end of the day, it's your story, and you should, only you could tell it as it should be told. Personal comments. So this is actually part of my personal statement here, and I could share a part of it. So let's say, while growing up in the San Joaquin Valley, my grandfather was my inspiration. He was a hardworking farm worker and compassionate leader. He advocated for fair pricing strategies to prevent smaller farms from collapsing and provided his employees financial and emotional support in difficult times. His strength, passion, and commitment sparked my desire to become an advocate for my community. In my last visit to my grandfather, I was excited to show him the strong man I had become. My excitement rapidly faded as I saw him on a hospital bed, motionless, solemn, and quiet. It was the first time I saw this invincible man depend on others as he was losing his battle against cancer. The night before his passing, my grandfather taught me that physical strength was fleeting. True strength, my strength, must come from my education. And then I'll kind of close it in with another experience that kind of tied that in later on. Okay, so I worked in one of the emergency departments in Fresno, and one of my most challenging experiences was translating a diagnosis of stomach cancer to a patient. It was especially difficult because it was the same illness that took my grandfather's life years ago. Giving and receiving this diagnosis of terminal cancer was devastating, but through it, I understood the importance of caring for a patient as a person, not as a disease. So with that, I feel that story really portrays, what's important to you, and it really kind of paints a picture of someone being in your shoes. And that story, I feel, really a reader or really remembers that. This is another section, which is letters of recommendation. And this section, you need, kind of the schools vary, but traditionally it's about 2 science professors, one non-science letter, and a physician or 2. And this is kind of how I approached the letters of recommendation. The big thing is ask early. You know, you want to give them about like 3 months in advance to really be able to write a really good letter for you. It's better to really get to know someone that knows you well and have them write a letter than, let's say, a chair of the biology department or the chair of the chemistry department, where all he or she could speak of is, oh, this student got an A in my class, and that's it. You know, someone that really gets to know you, not only in the classroom setting, but outside of it as well. It's good to provide a big rough draft of your CV and personal statement. And this is important because when writing a letter, it's really important for the writer to pull in specific experiences or specific things that you do that the reader could see that they have a connection aside from just a classroom setting. Strategic in the way you ask. I think I always asked. I always either emailed the individual, hey, when do you have time to chat? And then I would always ask them in person, and I always ask, hey, Dr. So-and-so or Professor So-and-so, would you be willing or able to write me a strong letter recommendation for medical school? And I think it's important to really emphasize a strong letter of recommendation, not just a letter of recommendation. And throughout this time, so one of my professors that wrote me one, I think he was my English professor starting my sophomore year. And even throughout the entire undergrad, I always stay connected with them. If it was just a follow-up email or just feeling like, hey, hope you're doing well. Just wanted to touch base. Like, this is what, I'm up to, just really to try to stay connected and not necessarily just to touch base like when you need the letter. Selecting what schools to apply to. So this is kind of my approach on what medical schools I apply to. So with the MSAR, the book that's, it's a book or a PDF that you get through the fee assistance program. And then they tell you historically what GPA and what MCAT did matriculants have at that certain school. So that kind of gives you, some gauge on what schools to apply to, but I definitely would not, that's not the most important thing when applying. Look at previous matriculants, kind of like I mentioned, like what they did, what were kind of their grades, their MCAT, and then what, how much students come from an underrepresented background, how many students come from in-state, how many come from out-of-state. Traditionally, in-state schools favor their in-state applicants. That doesn't mean that someone cannot get acceptance into a school that's not in-state, but just looking at the numbers, schools have more in-state matriculants than out-of-state. But that could also be because, you're an in-state student, you want to stay in-state. Mission statement, really looking at what the school stands for. Again, if their mission is to serve a certain region like the San Joaquin Valley, to increase diversity in medicine, or is their mission to, be the institution for cutting edge research? And I think that kind of aligns and kind of tells you like, okay, I'm really passionate about this program. I really like this school because this is what they're doing. Connection to area, of course, if you're a school that's local and you have a connection to the area, that always helps. And also talking to previous applicants. When I was going through the process, I reached out to some of my good friends that were successful in matriculating into medical school, and kind of saw how they approach, and during the interview process, if they really thought that that school is worth applying to or not. And these are kind of the schools I applied to. It's kind of just a section showing that also in the AMCAS application. And then secondary application. So after you submit your primary application, which is kind of what we went through, you know, your general information, your work activities, your personal statement, your letters of recommendation, if you send that to the school and then the school reads it and takes a look, and then they see like, wow, like I'm really impressed by, you know, by this student, and I really want to learn more about them. And specific schools have specific questions. So then they'll send you some more questions that they want you to answer before offering you an interview. And this is some of the, looking back at some of the secondary applications I still have, this is one of the school's questions. Describe involvement in the one most important non-academic activity that has been important in your life. What has been the one most important volunteer work you have done and why was it meaningful? What is the one most important honor you receive? Why do you view this as important? So this kind of gives you a chance to like, okay, what's important to the school? Because these are kind of school specific questions. So it seems that this school is interested in things that are outside the academic setting because they're asking me this question on what's important outside of academics. Also, they have what's your most important volunteer work. So it's just by looking at this, like, okay, this school, it seems like, yeah, they're, of course, they have a big focus and emphasis on academics, but they also really want someone who's well-rounded and has done a lot for the community or has things that he or she is passionate about outside of just the strict, I guess, science aspect of it. These I mentioned before also are kind of like rolling admission. So the sooner you get it done, the higher probability for an interview. And then also a good way to kind of think about answering this is kind of looking at the mission statement. Let's say, you know, a certain school wants to serve the Central Valley. Then that's really where you emphasize all your ties to the Central Valley and, you know, whatever, if that's a reason why you're pursuing medicine, what are some of the activities that you've done here and things like that. Interview tips. So after you complete the secondary application, they'll send you an interview. And then a cool pro tip on this, they usually send it to your email, but you could link your email to get a text notification. And then, so anytime they email you, you'll get a text. And so it's important to really kind of schedule these early. So you get whatever interview spot you want. Sometimes they like even fill up and you might, you know, if you took like 2 days or 3 days and that interview day might be filled out and you might even be on a wait list. So it's really important to, you know, to either look at your email very frequently or connect it to your phone. And you can kind of just Google kind of how to do that. But that's one of the real important things to do during this kind of interview phase. Of course, be on your best behavior the entire time. I think, you know, before you even step on campus, you know, and I think this is, you know, common sense and just common courtesy to everyone that you see. I think just being, you know, genuine and just very easygoing and respectful. Of course, I think dress professional. I think we all would expect, you know, for an interview to kind of dress the right way for the occasion. Be yourself. I think this is something that was always told to me, and I was like, oh, like, you know, is there anything I could do to prepare for the interview or things like that? They always said, you know, just be yourself. You know, the school. I feel that after going through the process, the school picks you, but you also pick the school. And if you're not yourself, it's kind of hard to gauge that. So really, just be yourself, and things will work out. A question that's always asked is the why medicine. So really, just have you know, time to reflect and an idea of why medicine. You know, practice. You know, you could. There's now a lot of the kind of UC campuses or the schools are doing the multiple mini mock interview, which kind of gives you a lot of different situations and at 1 hour time span. So it's kind of a little bit harder to practice to that, but something that I used that was helpful. So I remember one of the questions at one of the interviews was, oh, inside is your uncle who is having, who we want you to counsel on smoking cessation. So I kind of just would reflect and look at like, okay, how would I do it? But even something more importantly, like during my clinical experiences, how have I seen practicing physicians kind of tackle this, I guess this situation? I would just reflect, oh, what did Dr. So-and-so do if I ever like got stumped? And then bring your experiences. Interviewers will remember you more, and that's something. If you have an interviewer, like I mentioned, if someone's on smoking cessation, and you just kind of give a big picture, like generic answer. Oh well, I would sit down, go over like the risk of smoking, like why they're smoking. But even more importantly, I feel an interviewer will remember you more if you have something that bring in a personal experience. Okay, well, for example, I would sit with them to kind of go over the risks and benefits, but also, potentially say like, oh, I, collaborated with this foundation to help with smoking cessation. Here are the resources. This is kind of what we do, and kind of connect them, link them to that resource. Goes I feel above and beyond than, an answer that many interviewers might give. And then this is the residency, a quick slide on residency. So after medical school, you apply to residency in whatever specialty you choose. And there's this match process, which is kind of similar to the medical school application. You send this application to all these different hospitals across the nation. And there's a personal statement, letters of recommendation, activities, and then they send you interview things like that. So that's another process in itself. I think things that have been different for me now that I started residencies. Always remember, you are the doctor, right? And that's a transition from medical school where a lot of times you may have to get your order signed, like, oh, I think this, I want to get this blood draw for this patient, but you need to check in with a resident or with the attending doctor to get it assigned. Now I can just go and put the order in and sign my own orders. So I think it's just, with that comes more responsibility and really, I guess change your mindset that I'm the one caring for this patient, and I really have to, go above and beyond and really do my best for that. Work-life balance, with everything that you do, it's always important to really hold on to the things that make you whole or that kind of keep you sane. Sometimes with working, a lot of long hours, for me, it's, every day I try to at least, go for a run or, lift weights for at least like 45 minutes in an hour. And that's one of the things that really helps me out. Finances, you're finally, getting paid and not taking out loans like you did in medical school, which is nice. It's not what you'll get paid once you're finished with your residency, but at least it's money that you're, like I said, you're getting paid and not having to pay, which is nice. Schedule. Some of the services can be pretty like grueling, and depending on what specialty you choose. So they could vary from, if you're doing clinic or a clinic month, it might be, traditional like 8 to 5, 8 to 6. But if you're like on trauma surgery, you might have to come in like at 4 or 5 in the morning and then leave like 7, 8 p.m. So it's a fluctuating schedule, but it's important to, like I mentioned, really do what you love, because that's really what gets you through it. And then it's rewarding. Like I mentioned, for me, it's always very rewarding having the privilege and honor to care for a patient. But especially when you make that connection, when it's like with that special patient, it's like, okay, this is, this makes everything worth it. Like being able to be with that patient in this vulnerable situation and really, turn their situation around is very rewarding. And yeah, that concludes the presentation. So if any questions, I think Katya will moderate that. And again, here is the Central Valley Scholars link that you can tune in to see the presentation again or see a little bit more about the med school series from Central Valley Scholars. So please, any questions that you have, please ask.
So I think maybe one question here that I know I'm having is, what were some of the key takeaways from working in admissions? And, did that experience, teach you any like tips that you might want to give our attendees about the things that people are looking for in applications and how to present that in the best way?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So I was in admissions for UC Davis for 2 years. And I would go ahead and like review applications and kind of then we'll sit down on a round table and kind of say like, oh, I really advocate for this student, or I, might not advocate so much for this student. I think the big takeaways and I think the big key distinguishing things is the person's story and the person's experiences. So really being vulnerable and really validating that in the personal statement, I think goes, far a long way. Because with things like, the MCAT or GPA, as long as, you did okay, or like or you had certain circumstances that, well, I couldn't really study much because I was working 40 hours, 50 hours and going to school because I needed to provide for my family. I think admissions committee really understand that. And I think really just saying your experiences and kind of how that developed you and kind of how that made you the person you are today and how that translated to medicine. So I think the big takeaway to always remember is be vulnerable and really share your experiences and tell your story how it should be told.
Awesome. I think that's going to be super helpful for some people. So a couple of questions that have been submitted are, as a first generation low income student, I was hoping to get some insight on how you were able to finance school.
Yeah, totally. So for undergrad, a lot of it was through FAFSA or through outside scholarships. So I went to my institution and kind of reached out like, oh, where is kind of your scholarship database? And then I would kind of go through that and see what scholarships I felt applied to me. For medical school, there is also, again, the FAFSA, which you apply to every year, just like you did in undergrad. I also went to like the scholarship database that the medical school had. Also, when matriculating my first year and throughout, there's certain scholarships that the schools actually give based on kind of some of like the community work you've done, based on your academic performance and things like that. And additionally with that, I took out loans. Yeah, I took out loans. And those are something that you don't need to pay during medical school and can or can delay in residency. But I think you have to think about it as, one, like it shouldn't be a barrier because we're lucky to have, assistance through that. And then two, it's an investment. You're investing, in yourself to get advance your education. That's something that no one could take away from you. So that's how I always looked at it. Like, if you buy a car or a house and it burns down or, X, Y, and Z, like, that could be gone, but what you learn, no one, could really take that away from you.
Awesome. Thank you for that. One more question is, do you recommend taking pre-med classes in a community college or a post-BA program from what you've seen or experienced?
And then you were kind of cutting off, but I'll restate the question just to make sure I heard you clearly. So the question was, do I recommend taking pre-med courses at a community college or a post-bac program? Was that the question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I think it depends. I think, for example, let's say if it's the first time you're taking, let's say, biology, that one you could take at a community college or like a 4-year like university. But let's say you took biology, it didn't go so well the first time, and let's say you finish your undergrad, and let's say your GPA is not where you need it to be or where you want it to be, then that's where the post-bac programs are. That's when I would kind of opt towards a post-bac program after you took the course and your overall GPA is not where you need it to be or want it to be. But if you're taking it for the first time, you could do like a 4-year university or community college. But if you took it and then you're done with your undergrad degree, but then you need to kind of improve those grades, yeah, I would kind of recommend going the post-bac route at that point.
We just got another question. So this person said, hi, I'm about to graduate from a UC, but I have done no chem or bio classes. I have decided to go to med school. Do you recommend any programs that can help me get to the speed I need to be at? And my GPA is decent, but it's in a different field.
Okay. And then again, I was kind of cutting off, but I think the question was, they are graduating from a UC. They decided to pursue medicine, and they want to take these courses that they need. And if I recommend a certain place to take them or a certain program, is that correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So depending, I would say, like I said, if you haven't taken the course and you need, let's say, like all the pre-med courses to take the MCAT, then I would say you could take those. You could just sign up for those courses at your either your UC or a community college or whatever your kind of college university is close by. There's not like a program that I would recommend one over the other. I think it's just the school or the place that you feel you would be most successful in, whether that be because of having your family close by, or if that's because you're more familiar with that campus or institution. Yeah, so I would kind of just from a personal level kind of try to figure out at what place or institution I could thrive and what place or institution I have a good support system, and then take them there. Yeah, but like for this instance, I don't think they would necessarily like have to do a post-bac. They could if they also want like some I guess more like structure and overall guidance, but it's not like necessary that you have to do a post-bac and that's the only way. I had friends who graduated from a UC, and then she ended up taking kind of these courses at a 4-year university. And then I had other friends who graduated from UC and they're like, oh, I want like a little bit more structure, and did a post-bac. The post-bacs are a little bit more expensive than just if you were just to sign up for the courses. So that's kind of something to consider, but they also have a little bit more structure, and it's not just you taking the course, but also, connecting with, certain people at these institutions, and like interview practice, MCAT practice, kind of also like an additional things that a post-bac provides aside from just the courses itself.
Awesome. So one more person asked, you briefly mentioned resources such as UWorld or reading The New Yorker to help you study for the MCAT. Can you describe more what your action plan or strategy in studying for the exam were, and how many times did you take it?
Got it. Yeah. So I'll refer back to that slide quickly. Yeah. So I guess my takeaway or kind of my idea. So the first thing I did was, when am I going to take this test? Am I going to study during the summer and that's all I'm going to do? Study? Am I going to study during winter? Am I going to try to study like during classes? I personally would recommend to just take like your summer and just really focus on that, because I found it like really difficult to study with courses, because you have to do well on your courses, and then it's kind of like just another thing on top of your plate on what you're already doing. Something else that I did, I was working during the summer, and I like emailed and sat down with my supervisor and told him, I really need to do well on this exam. I scheduled it for this date, and like, is there any way that you could like reduce my schedule, or just like let me be off for like these 2 months until I take the exam? So that's one thing I did that I thought was helpful. Really sitting down, if you're able to take a little bit of time off to really like settle down and focus on the test. Then I kind of picked a resource. What I did mostly Kaplan and exam crackers for like the verbal passages. And the reason why it was because it was like a scholarship kind of summer program that I did where they gave me the Kaplan course. So that's why, since it was provided for me, that's why I chose Kaplan. I've heard great things about all the other exam services here. So I picked that primary source. And then I would jot down like, okay, if I have whatever 60 days, I want to, cover the material in 30 or 40 days. And then I would see like, how many chapters do I have to cover? In biology, let's say there's whatever, like 20 chapters in the Kaplan book. Okay, I want to cover biology in 5 days. So I'm going to do 4 chapters a day in biology. So that's kind of how I approach like all these subjects, like, oh, biology, biochemistry, organic chemistry. So how many chapters there was, and kind of divided that, how many days that I had. And then UWorld, at that time, I didn't know about UWorld when I was taking the MCAT as an undergrad student, but most recently knew about UWorld and started using UWorld in medical school for like the national board examinations. And that's a resource like I would highly recommend, as well as Anki. So kind of my typical study day, I would at that time I would like wake up like 7:30, eat breakfast, and then study till like noon, whatever section I had to study, go over like the review book, and then study till like noon, eat, and then go back, study till like 5, and then go do some exercise and like study like two more hours after that. And I would do that about like 6 times. 6 days out of the 7 days out of the week. And sometimes I would do like 7 days out of the week, but you kind of have to like feel it out for yourself. Because it's not a sprint. You really have to kind of pace yourself and make sure you're not burned out. But that's kind of what I did. And then I would take a practice test. Once I like was getting close to cover the material, I would take a practice test every weekend. But now in retrospect, if I knew UWorld was available, I would either, go and like wake up and cover, whatever section of like biochemistry, and then do the biochemistry questions in the afternoon, or wake up, do the biochemistry questions and review the concepts in the afternoon. And I just feel like that's what I did for medical school, for like the board exams. And I feel like with questions and applications, for me personally, it just it kind of like stuck better. And I wasn't only learning the concepts, but also learning kind of the structure and how they ask specific questions. So for the MCAT, I took it twice. And the big reason was the first time, it was a verbal section that I didn't do too well on. So that's when I really kind of like saw and like, okay, like the verbals were like, I need to make the improvement. And that's when I started focusing more on, I just did more and more verbal passages, and I started reading things like the New Yorker, just like reading more in general. And I felt that was really, really helpful. And the last thing I think is to have like a study or like a test taking strategy or approach. So for me, some people like reading like the last sentence of or reading the question first, and like, so they kind of prime their brain into like what they're going to ask. And then something that I recommend is kind of just like process of elimination. Let's say you have a question, has 4 or 5 answer choices. And I would like, let's say, the function of mitochondria is whatever. And it's like A. And then I would compare A with B. And I'd be like, oh, does A make sense? And if it's like, yes, okay, I might leave A, cross out B. A or C? Does C make sense? Maybe. But I would have to like cross out one of those before I like moved on to the next one. Let's say, oh, A still sounds better. Cross out C. A or D? no, D is like way out of like, doesn't even really make sense. A or E. So yeah, I think that's also a good strategy to have, because sometimes it's easy when you just like, oh, that sounds right, I'm just gonna, click this one and move on. Sometimes I found that I made a lot of like silly mistakes or errors just because I was like, oh yeah, that's like totally right, click, and I want to move on. But just having like an overall kind of test taking strategy.
Awesome. One more question is, does the postbac accept people that need to complete their pre-med requirements along with extra help, or is it?
So I think the question was, does a postbac program accept people that need their pre-med requirements along with extra help? What is the question? Yeah. Okay. Okay. I think that was the question. All right. So for the postbac, you can apply to the postbac once you complete like your undergraduate degree. So let's say you complete your undergraduate degree. It's not, the GPA may not be where you want it to be, or you want like a little bit more like structure with certain like classes or courses. Then that's when you could apply to the postbac. It might be for someone who like did anthropology and was like, oh, I just want to like take this like the pre-science courses, and I'm just gonna kind of do the postbac to take those courses. Or it could be someone who was a science major and they were like, oh, I didn't do too hot the first time, and I know I need to like improve my my performance in these courses, and you apply to the postbac at that time.
Yeah, so I think that's the last of the questions, and I think that's all the time we have. But thank you again to everyone for attending this webinar. Jose, I don't know if you have any closing remarks.
No, I think hopefully it was helpful to everyone. Hopefully you picked up a thing or two. And again, thank you for having me. And if you would like to reach out or know a little bit more or have more questions, go on Central Valley Scholars and / like medical school to hopefully answer those questions.
Yeah, just as a reminder, this presentation and this webinar will be posted on our website in just a few days, along with an article that kind of summarizes everything that is in here, as well as just general information about Dr. Acosta. Let me see if there's any last questions. Awesome. All right. Well, so it looks like we're good to end it here. Thank you again, everyone, for coming. And yeah.